So, welcome to the next edition of the Rare Business Podcast. With me today, I have Brian Solis, who is a principal analyst and futurist at the Altimeter Group, which is a profit company. He's also a best-selling author and speaker. Hey, Brian, how you doing?
I'm doing well, Adrian. How are you, sir?
Oh, very well. I had to say that all in one breath. What can I tell you? I'm doing quite well.
Impressive, sir.
So, Brian, for the people that are not familiar with you and your work, and just so for the benefit of our listeners and readers, can you tell us a little bit about you and a bit about the work that you do?
Yes. Well, to be honest, it's quite to be here and to answer this question and look back at everything is a bit it's a bit overwhelming and humbling to say the least. The reason why is because about 20 years ago, I set out on this path to really understand how disruptive technology and technology in general was affecting business, and then more so how it was affecting us as human beings. And somewhere along the way, I became a digital anthropologist and studied how you and I were changing as a result of our relationship with technology, both in a business capacity and then ultimately in a personal capacity. And I started to just share everything that I was learning freely, and that turned into blogs and articles and books and speaking. And here we are, and I'm still on the same path, wondering how did we get here? But still much more work to do.
Absolutely. And actually, I had the privilege of meeting you at the Wave Influence 2.0 event in London, where you were keynoting and I was sort of speaking at, throughout the kind of day. And we had a brief chat. And because you're of your position and the books that you write and the work that you do, and particularly because you have an eye on the future, that's something I really wanted to talk to you about, is the future of kind of CX. And the thing that where I wanted to start, however, is there is this idea that there's quite a bit of research flowing around at the moment that's saying that many organizations are just not making improvements to their customer experience, or they're just not keeping up with the expectations of the customers. And so what I'd be really interested in is to hear your view on kind of what you think the state of play is. And do you think that organizations are struggling to keep up? And if so, why is that?
I think in general, it's probably safe to generalize the answer, and that is most businesses are not keeping up.
Right.
Now, at the same time, if you look at balance sheets and financial reports, you'll see that, well, Brian, that statement could be disproven because most companies that you look at are probably profitable and even growing. So how could you make such an assertion, sir? The truth is that times are changing.
Yes.
Right? And so businesses are running off of borrowed time, but they are also running on sustained momentum, right? They've gotten to this point because they've really tried to be successful in the past. And the challenge is that success is a poor teacher for the future, in that you tend to reinforce past behavior instead of take chances on new behavior. And what we see is that traditional management constructs are built on 40, 50, 60-year-old premises, in that they become risk averse, cultures become management styles, you build an infrastructure that supports scaling and increasing margins and making things more efficient. You use technology to sort of enable all of those things. You surround yourself with a board, shareholders or stakeholders that want to make sure that you're on the right path. You get into this, what we call short-termism, this quarter-to-quarter behavior that then really makes you more tepid in how you attack the future as opposed to grow what you know in the past. And then you add to that the human element, or the human quotient, as I call it, that you have individuals who are making decisions about the business based on legacy mindsets, perspectives. Their experience of how they got into their roles today are actually working against them, but they don't know that because they're successful today. They're getting huge rewards for where they are today. And all of this sort of builds this ecosystem of which feeds itself on momentum and not in one that takes chances, and that creates exposure to disruption. And that's why, when you ask a question about, are businesses keeping up, the exposure to disruption is this. I call it digital Darwinism.
Right.
People are changing. Technology and people, society, it's evolving, right? And it's not just that we see more and more technology, like we're on the cusp of AI and AR and VR, and we're seeing cryptocurrencies all over the place. And all of these things have a net impact on how you and I think, how we behave, how we make decisions, what we value, what we don't value, our norms, etc. And at some point, it's divergent. Businesses are on this trajectory, we're on this trajectory, and that gap widens over time, and that increases the risk to disruption. And this is why you see industries all over the place. One night everything's fine, the next day it's not. And so that's a long answer to your question, but it's getting people to see what they can't see. It's getting people to feel like they can take risks and that they're empowered to do so, and that we change the incentivization structure to let them try new things.
And so let me pick up on a couple of things that you talked about. And first of all, there's this idea of this legacy mindset. And I think it's a really interesting thing. And I'd be interested to get your view on it, because it's if we look back, then our education system, many careers, C positions, kind of boards, are people that are on there tend to have got on there because they've been very successful in sort of one or two domains, and that's helped propel their career. So it's almost like our education is built on this reductive way of doing it, i.e. how sharp is your pencil and can you make it sharper in many ways, or sharper than the next guy's. But actually it seems to me that there's all this other piece of emerging research that actually this new landscape you're talking about is going to require sort of like a different approach. It's almost like we need less people that are reductive and more people that are almost like systems thinkers. Would you agree with that?
Well, I in principle, what you're saying is true in part.
Okay.
I don't know that there are any answers, but
okay.
Well, sorry, there are answers. It's just that the recipe for what the answers are for each individual organization is very dependent on the culture,
right,
the behavior, the norms, and the experience, the ratio between old thinkers and new thinkers, but yes, in general, what we are saying is that if you take the agile principles that IT is adopting in sort of how it attacks technology, right, to make it more nimble, make it more responsive, to be a little bit more test and learn, what we're looking at is sort of taking that same agility and applying it to culture.
Yes.
And
okay.
That's the hard part, because you don't have a leadership infrastructure today that says, yes, let's do this at a wide scale. You have it that's happening in pockets.
Right.
So, for example, we see big moves in digital transformation, corporate innovation. We see big moves in digital customer experience. We're starting to see moves in employee experience. But they're still being driven by a legacy mindset that doesn't know how to appreciate when the answers come back that says we need to do this not just differently, but radically differently. And that is when your board, your ecosystem, what have you around you, that says this is a cost center to pursue this, and that takes away from our perceived growth and profitability. And rather than seeing it as an investment in competing for the future, that I call it the Kodak moment, which is, or the new Kodak moment, which is the moment that your organization fails to see how humanity is evolving and changing, and bridging the gap between how you think and how they think.
Okay. And then the other thing I was thinking about is that, because you talked about this idea about digital Darwinism, and then there's a lot of people, you also mentioned it just a minute ago, people talk about digital transformations. My kind of challenge with that is that, do those two things kind of go together, and should actually we stop talking about transformation and actually keep talking about evolution, but it's a continuous kind of like process, which sort of aligns with your Darwinism idea. Because maybe it's just a semantic argument, but I don't know if there's something in there in terms of how we respond to this idea of transformation from a change in a cultural perspective.
That's a good question. So I've been talking about digital Darwinism since the my goodness, I don't even know, late 90s, early 2000s, and I started to see this when I I live in Silicon Valley, so I used to, I don't know that I still do, but I used to have a front row view of what was coming. And you could play that out. Back then it was a lot easier to play out in that time didn't move so quickly. And because a lot of technology was enterprise focused, it was big, it was expensive. But as we started to shift to the consumerization of technology, that really gave birth to an accelerated form of digital transformation. And it's just, digital Darwinism. It's just really looking at how society and technology are evolving, just more from a social science standpoint. But when you play that out, for example, you could look at smartphones, on-demand economy, things like Uber. You have all kinds of social networks that place you at the center of everything. So you start to look at how that plays out in society, right? So now you're empowered, connected, informed, demanding, elusive, impatient, a bit narcissistic, if you will.
Sure.
Those play out in consumerism and also as a potential employee. So the Darwinism part happens either way, right? Digital transformation is a business movement that started a while back, of which kind of ties back into the earlier part around agile, and we were looking at companies making big bold moves to the cloud and also embracing the consumerization of technology inside the organization. They started to look at bring your own device and building an infrastructure to support that. So that's how digital transformation was born. But if you look at how I just described it versus how we were talking about Darwinism, you could say, well, are you telling me that technology is the sole solution to all of this? And the answer is no. And over the last 4 or 5 years, I've been fighting with my research as a means of showing, to your first question, how businesses are not solving that gap, or as I saw quite a bit in London, minding that gap
Yes, indeed.
Between how people are playing out and how technology is playing out and how your business is going to solve for that. And so it's a human problem as much as it's a technology problem. And so they coexist. In fact, digital transformation, to some extent, in varying degrees, how you want to measure it, is how you answer the problem of digital Darwin's effect on your world.
Okay.
And that's where I see most businesses failing, is that they're still thinking technology is the answer and not trying to change mindsets, not trying to change perspectives. And that's the real opportunity.
Excellent. So, but thinking about that and thinking about kind of where people are on that sort of, I feel like that change sort of journey. I mean, you wrote a report, you're involved with writing a report called 6 Stages of Digital Transformation. I think it was last year. And there was you identified sort of 6 different stages. One is business as usual, then present and active, formalized, strategic, converge, and then innovative and adaptive. And the thing that I was kind of interested in is that if we were to think about how we, if you plot that on a curve, a bit like, remember the innovation curve, the innovation bell curve, early adopters,
the bell
laggards.
curve.
Yeah. I mean, how would you see kind of a big generalization, obviously, but sort of the general population of businesses, probably larger organizations, how do you think they're distributed across those 6 stages kind of right now? I mean, are we kind of mostly on the left, or are we mostly on the right?
It's a good question. I highly recommend that if you're listening to this and you're involved in any aspect of digital in your organization, please read the 6 Stages of Digital Transformation. It's available for free. And then I'd also ask you to read 2 more things. One is the State of Digital Transformation, and then one that just came out about a week ago is the Change Agents Manifesto.
Yes.
So the reason why I say all these things together is that the answer to your question is this, is that most companies are on the left to the middle.
Right.
Of those 6 stages. Every time I talk to organizations in my research, and you'll see it in the State of Digital Transformation, you'll see that when I talk to companies, they say they're on the far right, or that they're working to the far right. But when you look at the State of Digital Transformation, you'll see just how far left they are, and it's actually it's jaw-dropping how further along organizations think they are. And I've documented this gap over and over again in my work on corporate innovation. Companies think that they're more innovative than they really are. Companies think that they're further along in customer experience than they really are. And so there's this, and it's hard because no one wants to admit that they're not doing the best that they possibly can do, but they're holding themselves to lower standards, and I think that's the problem. So
Right.
the answer is, how do you get them to see that they're not as far along as they think they are?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I guess so. Yeah, sometimes maybe they all need therapists. Who knows?
It's so funny you say that, because in the Digital Change Agents Manifesto, in the article that I used I'll just tell you a more personal story. The idea behind that research was, every time I studied digital transformation, corporate innovation, what have you, the number one challenge I heard in why companies weren't further along was corporate culture and closed mindsets and older demographics within the company, and stubbornness and all kinds of cognitive biases. And when I would then try to probe into those answers, I stopped feeling like an analyst and more like a therapist. People would just let loose, and it was crazy. And it's funny because, but when this report published, the Change Agents Manifesto, it was really aimed at telling their story. How were they able to bring about change? How were they able to get momentum as a way of inspiring people like them and like us? And it's crazy because when the report was publishing and I had to go back and get approvals for all the quotes, I think something like 60% had quit jobs.
Oh, no.
Or moved on anyway. And it's a danger. It's a real danger to organizations. And I think the other reason why I wanted to publish that report was to tell executives, hey, you've got the people who are the answer, the key to the future of your business, and you are shutting them out. And by the way, we still see this same thing in politics. You have old mindsets and new mindsets. And who wins, right? Well, if the answer isn't who wins for today, because we're all going to compete for today one way or another, it's where do you want to be in 5 years?
Sure.
And that's a hard thing for people to really think about.
Mm-hmm. I think what's one of the interesting things within all of that, because I've been thinking about that sort of the demographic kind of differences, around about millennials, Gen Xers, baby boomers, etc., and think about there's this hyper level of attention and focus on new technologies and everything digital, and and I have a sort of a concern whether it's kind of unfounded or not, but I have anecdotal evidence that it sort of supports this idea that and other evidence that some of these baby boomers and also the older generation that hold a lot of the assets and the disposable income don't seem to be being brought along on the kind of the journey kind of right now. And it's almost a bit like there seems to be this hyper focus on technology that the people sometimes are losing sight of who their customers kind of really are, or who the most valuable customers really are. I mean, do you think that's kind of misplaced, or is that just that everybody's trying to keep up with the future?
The answer is yes.
Okay.
The reality is that, I mean, in the State of Digital Transformation report, for example, if 100% of companies, let's just assume, are participating in digital transformation to some extent, I found that the number one catalyst for driving accelerated digital transformation was customer experience work.
Yeah. So
here was the rub, is that 100% of the companies that I studied were investing in digital transformation. They all cited that CX, well, not all of them, but most of them said CX was the big driver, but only 34% of the companies had studied their customer in the last year. So you get this massive gap between, yes, customer experience is driving our digital transformation, but we have no idea who our customers are. So we're going to make investments anyway.
Yeah. Crumbs. Anyway, let's kind of leave that one to kind of like fester. So like Brian, you're a futurist, and so let's move on to a future focus. I mean, what are you currently excited about when it comes to sort of customer experience in the future, and where do you think we're going to see the most progress in the coming kind of year or 2 years, given kind of some of the things that you've just said?
I think, well, just so that everybody understands, the role of a futurist isn't to be a soothsayer of sorts. It's not, I don't have a crystal ball. My job as a futurist is to take certain scenarios and play them out, and how that plays out over time, and help decision makers have the best insights and information, or at least get to them in order to plan for those types of scenarios. If I had to look into a crystal ball to answer your question, I would say that what you're going to see is a massive spike in corporate innovation efforts, but not with the organization itself trying to be innovative. And that is simply because it is too great a task to ask people to become something different enterprise-wide. You can task small groups with that. So what's going to happen, and we're seeing it right now play out quite a bit with companies like Walmart, is that they are going to become innovative by acquiring innovative companies.
Right.
And they are going to create this portfolio of innovation within the flagship of the brand, but ultimately have to manage it separately because they won't be able to manage it within their construct today, because it'll hold them back and it'll rid themselves of all the wonderful talent that they just acquired. And how that's going to play out over time is new products, new services, new business units, which will most likely at some point have individual P&Ls and ratchet up to the bigger P&Ls. So that the greater stakeholder company or the flagship will reap those benefits. But that, by default, will all be essentially buying customer experience, in that a lot of these innovative companies are successful and innovative because they figured out the new customer needs and preferences and behaviors, and it's designed accordingly. And that's going to become more prominent in the next 5 to 10 years. We're also going to watch a lot of big favorite brands go away.
Well, yeah. On that then, if you were to give the people that are listening to this that are sort of leaders in this sort of CX space, because that's kind of where I kind of like sit, is what would be your advice to them? I mean, is it that look to invest, or is it just keep doing, or focus on your people and culture? I mean, what would your advice be?
Well, if you're in the organization and you're what would be the digital change agent, or somebody passionate about technology and helping your company become more digital, or passionate about customers, read the Change Agents Manifesto. It's 5 years of research, and it's mostly psychological work on how you get people around you to see the opportunity without being threatened or skeptical about it, and know that you're not alone, and that we need you more than ever. You are the lifeline to organizations, and your work is about how they get to realize it and open your career to new possibilities. If you're an executive, listen to what I just said. You have people within your organization who feel like they cannot make an impact and help the organization. And I think the challenge is you have to challenge yourself. Can you allow your metric of success to be based both on what you have to do today, but also create a new set of priorities and metrics for what you need to do tomorrow to be successful? You're not on the path if you're only doing one of those things. And the reality is that your markets for employees and customers are evolving away from how you think and what your board or ecosystem values. And it's time that you become a leader and not a manager.
Perfect. So we've got a couple of more minutes, I know, because you've got to then run, Brian. So, I mean, quickly, do you have a couple of organizations that you think, I think they're worth watching, I think they're doing the right sort of thing, they're sort of leading the way, that you kind of keep an eye on because you think, I think they're sort of on that curve, as it were, they're really on the right and kind of doing things and really some really interesting things?
I think that holistically, you have the usual suspects who are doing really interesting things in terms of on the far right. But for the most part, you don't have any one company really doing everything right, because again, they're all dealing with the same things. Some aspects of their organizations they're all siloed still, right?
Yeah.
But you have interesting stories that are coming along, like Domino's Pizza, which, depending on your thoughts of their pizza, it's not not really relevant to the fact that the organization itself, quite famously stated earlier in the year that they're becoming less of a pizza company and more of a technology company.
Yeah.
You have organizations like Starbucks that are really focused emphatically on the mobile consumer, not the gourmet consumer, gourmet coffee consumer. And with statements like that even though they sound like, well, that's that's great. I could say that we're a technology company. That's not the point. Domino's is looking at how can they better serve their customers with a better product and service with technology. So they're looking at customer experience.
Yeah.
Starbucks is saying our consumers increasingly mobile and connected and empowered. How can we build a store infrastructure that better caters to the traditional but also the mobile consumer?
Mm-hmm.
And that involves payment innovation, that involves service innovation. So they're giving their work a sense of purpose, and that purpose then spills over to the rest of the organization. So it's examples like that I want people to pay attention to. I think every time I go to a conference or read a book or read a white paper, we see these case studies that fool people into thinking like, okay, well, I want to be just like this company, but when you open the door again, you realize, oh, I'm a therapist again. It's not all green on the other side.
Excellent. So, Brian, is there anything that else that you'd like to kind of add before I ask you my final question that I always ask at the end of these conversations?
Oh, let's jump into it.
So, my final question that I always ask is this, Brian: is there anything that you would like to shamelessly plug?
Aside from my research, please do download. It's written for you and it's free. I do have a book. It's called X: The Experience When Business Meets Design, and it is available hopefully everywhere you shop. And I would really appreciate if you could not only read it, but also take a look at the design that went into it, because I applied what I'm asking you to do to the construct of your business, to the construct of me as an author, and the old school aspect of why would I write a book on designing experiences in the future economy. It's a bit ironic, but the book itself is an example of what's possible when you open your mind.
Perfect. Brian, thank you for that. I'll make sure I get all that kind of linked up with links to the research and everything. But I just want to say thank you for sharing your time and your insight and your experience kind of with us today. That's been an absolute pleasure.
Yeah, it's been my pleasure, and I think that's what drives me is being able to connect the dots between what many executives don't see, and also the struggles that we have as change agents, and hopefully my work helps you.
Perfect. Thank you.